She was just a nurse, until she fell into the hands of the Yakuza leader. But in a few hours, his empire would crumble. And the reason? No one could have imagined. But before I tell this story, subscribe to the channel to help me reach 1,000 subscribers. It's my dream. Continuing. The sunrise over Brighton Bay bathed Kenneth Blackwood's office in golden and gray hues. Standing by the panoramic window on the 40th floor, the leader of the Blackwood clan watched his city as he slowly twirled the jade ring on his mutilated finger, a scar he had carried with pride since his 20s, when he sacrificed his little finger to atone for a failure before his father. The Brighton skyline stretched out like an empire of concrete and steel, and in every corner of that horizon there were businesses, allies, and enemies that answered to the Blackwood name. His phone vibrated discreetly. Kenneth didn't need to look to know it was his most loyal lieutenant, Thomas, the only one authorized to call at that hour. "Oya Bun, we have a situation." Thomas's voice was grave, contained. "Your mother. She had a relapse overnight. The private doctors say the situation is critical." Kenneth felt a blow to his chest. Eleanor Blackwood, the matriarch, the Iron Woman who had held the clan together during the 3 years his father was in prison. The same woman who, now 78, still commanded the family council with the precision of a sword. "I need to see her. Now." His voice betrayed no emotion. "I've already arranged the helicopter, but there's another problem." Thomas hesitated. Young Sterling, the old Sterling's grandson, was admitted to Central General Hospital last night. "Bullet wound." Kenneth clenched his fists. The Sterling clan was their rival, former allies turned mortal enemies after a betrayal that cost his older brother, Theo, his life 15 years ago. A cold war had settled in since then, with occasional skirmishes, but never a direct confrontation. Who wounded him? "It wasn't our men. It seems to have been an internal dispute within their clan. But he's delirious in the emergency room, under the care of that veteran nurse, the one who saved your nephew last year." Kenneth knew Emily Parker, the head nurse at Central General Hospital, an extraordinary woman, incorruptible, dedicated, with an almost mythical reputation in the city. She was one of the few civilians who maintained her dignity and tact, even knowing which patients belonged to the underworld, and which were just ordinary citizens. What is he saying in his delirium? About the operation at the docks. About the documents. Kenneth felt his blood run cold. Operation Chrysanthemum was the most ambitious and dangerous plan the clan had ever conceived, orchestrated for years on end, compromising documents, originals, not copies, from politicians, judges, and generals who had been manipulated or bribed over 3 decades by all the major clans. A life insurance policy, and also a weapon of mass destruction for the British underworld. Suspend all operations. All of them. Kenneth rarely raised his voice, but when he did, it was like thunder. "I want the entire executive corps at the Windermere estate by the end of the day." "And what about the nurse?" "Bring her. No violence, no fuss. Say my mother needs specialized care. Offer money. A lot of money." "And if she refuses?" Kenneth closed his eyes for an instant. "Then don't offer a choice." In the helicopter, as he flew over the British megalopolis, Kenneth leafed through the dossier on Emily Parker. 46 years old, single, dedicated to the emergency room for over 20 years. No known political affiliations. Apparently no vices. A simple, almost monastic life, dedicated to the hospital. She had refused promotions to remain on the front lines. Curious, Kenneth thought, how someone could choose such a life. In his world, power and influence were the only metrics that mattered, the only thing that protected you and yours. Still, there was something he respected in that woman. The same thing he respected in his mother, an unwavering dedication to a personal code. Before landing at the family's ancestral estate in the Windermere Mountains, he received a message from Thomas. The nurse is with us. No incidents. The Blackwood estate in Windermere was an old inn transformed into a modern fortress, though it retained traditional English architecture. Armed guards discreetly patrolled the meticulously maintained Zen gardens. Upon disembarking, Kenneth was immediately approached by Harry, the family's private doctor. She's stabilized for now, but the renal failure is progressing. Without a transplant? When? 2 months. Perhaps less? Kenneth nodded. His mother was on the official transplant list, of course. But given her age and condition, the chances were almost nil. There were other paths the Blackwood clan knew well, involving obscene amounts of money and the Southeast Asian black market for organs. But his mother had always rejected that possibility. "I wouldn't save my life by taking another's," she had said months ago when the subject first arose. It was one of Eleanor Blackwood's many contradictions. A matriarch who had managed a criminal empire with an iron fist, but who maintained an inflexible personal code. Kenneth entered his mother's room and found her surprisingly alert, sitting on the traditional bed with various machines around her. Even ill, Eleanor Blackwood maintained the severe dignity that characterized her. Impeccably pinned gray hair, traditional kimono, upright posture. "Don't look at me with those funeral eyes," she reprimanded him in a low but firm voice. Kenneth smiled slightly. "How do you feel?" "Like an old woman who's been too close to death for too long." She waved her hand, dismissing the subject. "I've been hearing rumors, Kenneth, about the Sterlings, about dangerous documents." Even on the verge of death, Eleanor Blackwood maintained her informants and her intelligence network. It was no wonder she had survived so long in that world. "We're handling it." "No, you're reacting, not thinking." Her dark eyes, though framed by wrinkles, maintained the same sharp intensity. "You brought that nurse, didn't you?" "Ms. Parker." Kenneth nodded. "Bring her here. I want to see her." "Mother, I don't think—" "I'm not asking for your opinion. I'm giving an order." The tone was soft, but the authority unmistakable. Minutes later, Emily Parker was in the room. Kenneth observed with interest the meeting of the two women. So different, and yet there was something similar about them. The same firmness in their gaze, the same calm dignity. "Mrs. Blackwood." The nurse bowed formally, but not subserviently. "I am Emily Parker. I was brought here to help you, although the circumstances are not ideal." "You treated my nephew last year, and yesterday. You treated young Sterling." Emily showed no surprise at the matriarch's knowledge. "Yes, my duty is to all patients, regardless of who they are." "And what did he say in his delirium?" The nurse looked directly at Eleanor, then at Kenneth. "Medical information is confidential, but I believe you already know what he revealed, or I wouldn't be here." The audacity of the answer caused Thomas, who remained at the door, to automatically reach for his weapon. But Eleanor Blackwood gestured for him to restrain himself, and then, surprisingly, smiled. Honesty, rare in these times. The matriarch gestured for everyone to leave, except the nurse and her son. "Kenneth, the operation at the docks, you must cancel it." "I've already suspended all operations until we resolve this situation." "No, cancel it permanently." Eleanor's voice became even softer, almost a whisper. "Your father built that file as an insurance policy, not as a weapon. What you plan to do now will unleash chaos that no one will be able to control." Kenneth felt a wave of frustration. The Sterlings killed Theo. They need to pay. The entire corrupt system that protects them needs to be exposed. "At the cost of destroying everything we've built? Of dragging our name through the mud?" Eleanor shook her head. "Revenge is a luxury we cannot afford. Not this way. Your condition is worsening every day. If we can use the documents to negotiate with the government, perhaps we can... A transplant? At the cost of a clan war and the exposure of half the government? Eleanor laughed, a dry, harsh sound. No, this is not the Blackwood way. The nurse observed the interaction in silence, but Kenneth could feel her eyes evaluating every word, every reaction. It was unsettling, the feeling of being judged not by another criminal, but by someone from outside that world, someone who represented a morality he had long abandoned. A guard rushed into the room. Oyabun, we have a situation. A paramedic is trying to infiltrate the estate. He came with the medical shipment, disguised. Emily Parker maintained an impassive face, but Kenneth noticed the flicker of recognition in her eyes. You know him? It wasn't a question. The nurse nodded slowly. He was my student. We've worked together for years. And he came to rescue you. Kenneth approached her, studying every nuance of her expression. Does he know anything about the documents? No, Emily replied with convincing firmness. He must have just followed the clues of my disappearance. Kenneth reflected for a moment, then turned to the guard. Let him in. But watch him. I want to know exactly what he does, who he calls, what he's looking for. After the guard left, Eleanor indicated a chair for the nurse. Sit down, Ms. Parker. It seems we have a lot to discuss. And Kenneth, you have a decision to make. That night, in his room in the east wing of the estate, Kenneth contemplated the moonlit gardens. The conversation with his mother had disturbed him, not by the request itself to cancel the operation, but by what it meant, abandoning the revenge he had meticulously planned for years. His phone vibrated. It was Agent Smith, his informant in the police. The task force is moving, the voice whispered from the other end. Someone alerted them about the operation at the docks. Kenneth felt his blood boil. Who? We don't know. It was an anonymous tip. But they're taking it seriously. They're mobilizing tactical teams. The Blackwood leader hung up without responding. His mind processed the possibilities. If the police intercepted the operation at the docks, the documents would fall into the wrong hands. The entire clan would be compromised. Years of work lost. Thomas entered without knocking, which he only did in emergencies. The paramedic, he said, out of breath. He managed to reach the nurse. They're trying to escape. Kenneth grabbed his weapon, checking it by reflex. How? The medical supply truck. They overpowered the driver. Block all exits. Mobilize all men. I want them alive. As he ran through the estate's corridors, Kenneth felt a whirlwind of contradictory emotions. Part of him admired the courage of that paramedic, risking himself like that for someone important to him. It was the kind of loyalty he valued in his own clan. Another part was furious at the audacity, at the threat that escape represented to his plans. Upon reaching the main courtyard, he saw the truck already moving, heading for the main gate. Without hesitation, he took a rifle from one of the guards and aimed carefully. Not at the tires. It would be too dangerous with the winding mountain road ahead. Instead, he aimed at the radiator. The shots echoed in the night. The truck continued for a few meters, but soon began to lose speed. Kenneth ran towards the vehicle, followed by his men. He was a few meters away when the truck skidded on a curve, went off the road, and overturned, rolling down the embankment. "Bring them up!" he shouted to his men. As his subordinates hurried down the embankment, Kenneth watched in horror as flames began to lick the truck's cabin. What should have been a simple capture was turning into a tragedy. Inside him, something stirred. An emotion long buried under layers of cultivated coldness. Remorse. His men managed to pull two people from the wreckage. The paramedic and the driver, both injured but alive. The nurse, however, remained trapped in the cabin, now engulfed in flames. "Get her out of there," Kenneth ordered, descending the embankment himself, ignoring Thomas's worried calls. but it was too late. The fuel tank exploded, turning the vehicle into a fireball. Kenneth was thrown backward by the force of the explosion, falling onto the rocks. When he managed to get up, the truck was already completely consumed by flames. A cold sensation spread through his body. He, Kenneth Blackwood, leader of Brighton's most powerful clan, had just caused the death of an innocent. It wasn't the first death at his hands, but there was something deeply disturbing about this one, as if a last thread of humanity had snapped within him. He returned to the estate carrying that invisible weight. The paramedic and the driver were taken to an improvised interrogation room. The former was in shock, glazed eyes fixed on a distant point, while the latter, more conscious, cast looks of pure hatred at Kenneth. "I want to know everything," Kenneth said, keeping his voice controlled despite the internal turmoil. "Who else knows about the documents? Who alerted the police about the operation at the docks?" The driver spat on the floor. "Go to hell." Thomas stepped forward, ready to persuade him more forcefully, but Kenneth stopped him with a gesture. Violence now seemed inappropriate, as if the nurse's death had changed something fundamental in the dynamic of that night. Instead, he approached the paramedic, who finally seemed to notice him. "You," the man murmured, voice trembling, "you killed her." "It was an accident," Kenneth replied automatically, though he knew the fault was his. "But now I need to know what you know, for everyone's sake." The look the paramedic gave him was filled with such pure and honest contempt that Kenneth almost recoiled. It was like looking into an inverted mirror, seeing exactly what he was not, what he had ceased to be a long time ago. "Young Sterling," Kenneth continued, "what exactly did he say about the documents?" It was the driver who answered surprisingly, "That they expose all of you, that they show how the clans, the police, and the government are all parts of the same rotten system." Kenneth nodded slowly. This he already knew. It was precisely these dangerous connections that the documents revealed, the web of corruption, blackmail, and complicity that had sustained the clan's power for generations. Names, dates, values. Concrete evidence, enough to bring down ministers, generals, judges. His phone vibrated. He stepped away to answer, keeping his eyes on the prisoners. "Oyabun," it was Agent Smith's voice again. "The police operation is underway. They intercepted the meeting point at Brighton Docks, arrested 3 of your men and 4 of the Sterlings. And the documents? Not found. It seems they weren't there." A shiver ran down Kenneth's spine. If the documents weren't at the agreed location, where would they be? A dark possibility began to form in his mind. "Keep monitoring the situation," he ordered, then hung up. Upon returning to the prisoners, he noticed something different in the paramedic's gaze, an almost triumphant gleam. "Where are the documents?" he asked directly. The paramedic remained silent, but his look said everything. He knew something, or had done something. "Thomas, check if he managed to send any messages before they tried to escape." As his lieutenant left to carry out the order, Kenneth felt the weight of the night on his shoulders. The nurse's death, the compromised operation, his mother's request to cancel everything, and now the possibility that the documents were compromised. More than ever, Kenneth Blackwood, the ruthless leader, felt cornered by his own choices. The path ahead, which had once seemed so clear, was now obscured by doubts and the ghost of a nurse who had dared to maintain her integrity to the end. Back in his mother's room, he found her asleep, her face serene despite the severity of her condition. For a moment, he imagined what it would be like to lose that woman who, despite all her contradictions, was his moral compass in a world without rules. "What would you do, Mother?" he whispered, knowing there would be no answer. On the horizon, the first lights of morning began to appear, tinging the sky with pink and orange hues. A new day was dawning for Brighton, and for the Blackwood clan, a day of decisions that would forever change the balance of power in the city. The morning brought with it the sound of distant sirens. Kenneth Blackwood was in his office at the Windermere estate, exhausted after a sleepless night, when Thomas entered with a grave expression. "The police have set up roadblocks on all main routes to Brighton," the lieutenant informed him. "They know something big is happening. Furthermore, we confirmed that the paramedic managed to send a coded message before they tried to escape." Kenneth massaged his temples, feeling his headache worsen. To whom? A burner number. Impossible to trace. But the content was clear. Brighton Docks, 5 p.m. Change of plans. Danger for everyone. The message coincided with the planned operation time at the docks. Someone had leaked precise information. Kenneth stood up, staring at the mountainous landscape through the window. The earthly paradise his family had transformed into a fortress now seemed like a prison. And the two prisoners? The driver knows nothing useful. The paramedic? Thomas hesitated. He's broken by the nurse's death. He's not responding to interrogations. Bring him here. Minutes later, the paramedic was escorted into the office. The man looked as if he had aged 10 years overnight. Deep, dark circles, eyes swollen from crying, but there was still a spark of resistance in his gaze. "Sit down," Kenneth ordered, dismissing the guards with a gesture. When they were alone, he continued, "I am not a monster, despite what you think. Ms. Parker's death was an unfortunate accident." The paramedic let out a bitter laugh. "Unfortunate? You kidnapped an innocent civilian and killed her when she tried to escape. That has a name in any court in the world." "And yet, here we are," Kenneth replied, keeping his voice calm. "You, a man who illegally entered private property, and I, trying to understand what's at stake. The documents your friend Sterling mentioned, do you know what they contain?" "I know enough," the paramedic replied, finally meeting Kenneth's eyes. "I know that for decades you have manipulated, corrupted, and blackmailed people in government. I know that lives are destroyed so you can maintain your power, and I know that you are about to lose everything." The certainty in the man's words was unsettling. Kenneth studied him for a moment, then opened a drawer and pulled out a thin folder. "I imagine you know who this man is," he said, pushing a photograph across the table. The paramedic paled as he recognized the face. It was his brother, who had disappeared 7 years ago after witnessing a Yakuza-related crime. "He's alive," Kenneth continued, "protected by us in Cornwall with a new identity. Not out of kindness, of course. He had valuable information that I preferred to keep in reserve rather than silence him permanently. Why are you telling me this?" "To show that there are nuances you don't understand. We are not just bloodthirsty monsters." Kenneth leaned forward. "Now, I want to know exactly what your message said, and to whom it was really sent." The paramedic hesitated, the conflict evident on his face. The possibility that his brother was alive was a blow he clearly did not expect. "It was to a contact in the police," he finally admitted. "Someone Emily knew. I only warned them about the operation at the docks. I didn't mention the specific documents." Kenneth nodded slowly. It was plausible, and it would explain how the police task force had mobilized so quickly. "And where are the documents now?" The paramedic held his gaze. "I don't know." A lie. Kenneth could see it in the man's eyes. But before he could press further, a guard rushed in. "Oyabun, it's your mother. She's—" Kenneth didn't wait for him to finish. He ran through the estate's corridors to the matriarch's room, where doctors and nurses worked frantically around the bed. Eleanor Blackwood was pale, the monitors beside her beeping an alert. "What happened?" Kenneth demanded. Harry, the family doctor, moved away from the other professionals. "Acute renal failure. We are trying to stabilize her, but—" Do whatever is necessary, Kenneth ordered, feeling panic grow within him. Use all resources. Bring specialists from London. Pay whatever it takes. Kenneth, his mother's weak voice called him from the bed. He immediately approached, taking her cold, fragile hand. Don't let this change you, she whispered with difficulty. Remember what we talked about. Mother, save your strength, he pleaded, squeezing her hand. You'll be fine. But Eleanor shook her head slightly. Listen to me. There's a letter in my Butsudan for you. Read it when I'm gone. Her eyes met his with surprising intensity. Promise. I promise, he replied, feeling a lump in his throat. The matriarch seemed to relax after hearing this, closing her eyes as the doctors continued their work. Kenneth left the room feeling strangely empty. In the corridors, he found Thomas waiting anxiously. The police operation at the docks is over, the lieutenant informed him. 4 of our men were arrested. 6 of the Sterlings, too. But the documents weren't there. And young Sterling at the hospital? Transferred to police custody. He's under heavy protection. Kenneth reflected for a moment. His head was a chaos of conflicting worries. His mother on the verge of death, the operation compromised, the documents lost, the accidental death of the nurse weighing on his conscience. I want to speak with old Sterling, he decided suddenly. Thomas's eyes widened. Oyabun, that's extremely risky. Our clans have been in open conflict for... That's precisely why I need to speak with him, Kenneth interrupted. Arrange a neutral meeting. Use the traditional channels. As his lieutenant left to carry out the order, Kenneth went to the family Butsudan, the Buddhist altar where photographs of the Blackwood ancestors rested, including his father and brother. Behind his grandfather's photo, he found an envelope sealed with the family crest. He hesitated before opening it. His mother was still alive. Opening the letter would seem like admitting a defeat he was not prepared to accept. Instead, he put the envelope in the inside pocket of his suit and returned to the office. There, he found a notification on his secure laptop, an encrypted message from one of his most trusted informants in the police. Young Sterling has made a deal with the prosecution. He will deliver the documents to the Swiss consulate tomorrow in exchange for international protection. The news was devastating. If those documents were made public, not only the Blackwood clan, but all the major British clans would collapse. Decades of meticulously built power and influence would be destroyed in a matter of hours. Kenneth felt cornered. It was then that his phone rang. An unknown number. Oyabun Blackwood, said the voice on the other end of the line, without identification. Kenneth immediately recognized the calm, authoritative tone of Harold Sterling, the patriarch of the rival clan, a man he hadn't heard from in 15 years, since his brother's death. Mr. Sterling, he replied, keeping his voice neutral. I heard you wanted to speak with me, the old leader continued. I'm surprised. Have times changed that much? Desperate times call for desperate measures, Kenneth replied. Your grandson is about to destroy not only my clan, but yours as well. A heavy silence followed these words. My grandson grew up in a different world than ours, Harold finally said. He believes in concepts like justice, transparency. Naivety, Kenneth corrected. What he doesn't understand is the chaos that will follow if those documents come to light. It won't just be the end of the clans, it will be the collapse of entire institutions. And does that matter to you? The question was loaded with skepticism. Since when does Kenneth Blackwood care about the good of the nation? Since my mother is dying, Kenneth replied, surprising himself with his sincerity. Since I realize that her legacy is in my hands, and it is not a legacy of destruction. Let's meet, Harold finally said. Sarinaidert, Westminster Abbey, tomorrow, at dawn. Each brings only one escort, No weapons. I'll be there, Kenneth agreed, then hung up. That night, he finally decided to read his mother's letter. The thin sheet was covered in Eleanor Blackwood's elegant handwriting. My son, it began. The Blackwood Empire was not built solely on blood and fear, as many believe. Your grandfather, my father-in-law, was a man of vision. He understood that true power came not from violence, but from interdependence. The documents your father gathered over decades were not just insurance for the clan. They were proof of a complex system that kept British society functioning, despite its contradictions. Yes, there was corruption, but there was also order. What your brother never understood, and what eventually led to his death, was that this balance is fragile. He wanted to expose everything, to cleanse society of its impurities. An admirable idealism, but dangerously naive. Now you face the same dilemma. Using the documents as a weapon, as revenge, would be satisfying in the short term, but catastrophic for everyone. My last request is that you find a different path. Not the path of revenge, nor that of surrender, but the path of transformation. Times are changing, my son. Britain is changing, and the Blackwoods must change too. Or they will perish. With eternal love, your mother, Eleanor. Kenneth let the letter fall onto the table, feeling a confused mix of emotions. Anger, sadness, confusion, and something else. Something he hadn't felt in a long time. Clarity. His phone vibrated again. It was Thomas. Oyabun, we have a strange situation. The paramedic received a call. What are you talking about? How did he receive a call? One of the guards made a mistake. He let him use the bathroom without proper supervision. The person on the other end of the line was Nurse Parker. Kenneth felt a shock of adrenaline. Impossible. She died in the explosion. Apparently not. According to the paramedic, she escaped through a hidden compartment in the truck just before the explosion. She was rescued by a fisherman on the coast. The news was surprisingly comforting. Knowing the nurse had survived relieved a weight Kenneth hadn't even known he was carrying. Release him, Kenneth ordered, surprising his lieutenant. Oyabun, he knows too much. Release him! Give him enough money to return to Brighton and tell him to deliver a message to the nurse. I want to meet with her. The next morning, Kenneth Blackwood drove his own car through the almost deserted streets of London, with only Thomas by his side. Westminster Abbey was strangely empty at that hour, the result of a few strategic phone calls to local authorities. Harold Stirling was already waiting for him in the main hall. The old patriarch seemed to have aged decades since Kenneth last saw him. Mr. Blackwood, the old man formally greeted him, with a small bow that Kenneth returned. They sat on low benches facing the Abbey's main altar. Perhaps he sees what we, in our arrogance, refuse to see, that our time is over, old Stirling said, looking directly at Kenneth. The words hit him like a physical blow. It was like hearing an echo of his mother's letter. What path would that be? Kenneth asked. The path of legitimacy. The old man's eyes gleamed with surprising sagacity. Our clans built empires in the shadows. We have properties, legitimate businesses, connections. Why not use all of this to build something that can survive in the light of day? Are you suggesting we abandon the underworld completely? I am suggesting evolution, not extinction, Harold replied. Let the old businesses die naturally. Focus on what can grow in the sunlight. The meeting ended shortly after, without formal agreements, but with a tacit truce between the clans. Upon returning, he was informed that Nurse Parker had voluntarily arrived at the estate. Bring her here, he ordered. Minutes later, Emily Parker entered the room. Despite visible bruises and a bandaged arm, she maintained the same dignity Kenneth had observed before. You voluntarily returned to the place where you were held prisoner? After almost dying trying to escape? Kenneth asked, fascinated. Emily turned to him, her gaze firm. I return as a healthcare professional, and because your messenger said you wanted to discuss an agreement. There too. Documents are about to become public. That will change everything, Kenneth said. It's already changing, Emily replied. The police arrested 3 high-ranking officials this morning. There are rumors that a minister will resign by the end of the day. Nurse Parker, I need your help. My help? For what? To make the transition. The Blackwood clan has resources, properties, people. We have the opportunity to change direction, to use what we've built for something different. Are you talking about legitimizing your businesses? I'm talking about transformation, Kenneth replied, using the word from his mother's letter. Starting with the hospital. Which hospital? Central General Hospital in Brighton has been in financial trouble for years. The Blackwood clan could buy the hospital through our legitimate companies. Guarantee investments, equipment, staff. In exchange for what? The distrust was evident in the nurse's voice. In exchange for your guidance, your vision for what the hospital could be, without criminal influence, without compromising medical ethics, a true service to the community. Why would you do that? It was Eleanor who answered from the bed. Because sometimes, the only way to save something you love is to let it change. She looked at her son with a mix of pride and defiance. In the following days, a plan began to take shape. Kenneth activated his network of lawyers, accountants, and front executives. Documents were prepared, transfers organized, corporate structures redesigned. The Blackwood Empire would not be dismantled. It would be transformed. When the police finally arrived at the estate 3 days later, Kenneth received them personally at the main gate. Kenneth Blackwood, announced the commanding officer, you are being investigated for dozens of crimes, including criminal association, extortion, corruption, and obstruction of justice. I understand, Kenneth calmly replied. My lawyers are prepared to cooperate fully with the investigations. But before we go, I have one last request. My mother is dying. I would like to say goodbye properly. Escorted by police, Kenneth returned to Eleanor's room. She was conscious, her eyes shining with fever. They've come, she whispered. Yes, Kenneth replied, holding her hand. But don't worry. Everything is being handled as we planned. A slight smile touched the matriarch's lips. You were always the smartest of my children, the most adaptable. She weakly squeezed his hand. Remember, our family survived war, occupation, shifts in power. We will survive this too. Through transformation, Kenneth agreed. Through transformation, she repeated, closing her eyes. When Kenneth left the room, handcuffed and escorted by the police, he found Emily Parker in the corridor. The nurse looked at him without hostility, only with a curious mixture of respect and caution. Central General Hospital, he said. The papers are with my lawyer. Everything will be done as I promised. She nodded slowly. I will ensure your mother receives the best care. Thank you, Kenneth replied, realizing the irony of the situation. As he was led out of the estate, Kenneth Blackwood felt a strange sense of peace. The empire he had known was crumbling, yes, but from the ashes, something new could emerge, something that perhaps his mother would have approved of. On the Brighton horizon, the sun set in orange and golden hues, very similar to those that had announced the beginning of this journey. A cycle was completing, and another unexpectedly was beginning. The Blackwood legacy would not be forgotten. It would be transformed, and in that, there was a strange form of honor, perhaps the truest Kenneth had ever known.